All right, welcome everybody. We will go ahead and get started here. Let me go ahead and open up my presentation. So the title of tonight's webinar is Standardized Testing and Dyslexia, and I just wanted to welcome you all to the event tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. We know that everybody has a busy schedule when we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be with us here for this webinar. So welcome. Thought I would introduce myself. My name is Peter Groth. I'm the founder and CEO of Dyslexia Connect online tutoring, which I started in 2010. I was trained in something called the Orton-Gillingham method in 2004. And Orton-Gillingham is a very well-known method for teaching reading and spelling to individuals with dyslexia. And I did that for a number of years in person as a dyslexia tutor before I started Dyslexia Connect in 2010. And overall, I have about 21 years of experience working with students who have dyslexia. I thought I would share a little bit about Dyslexia Connect. We provide online dyslexia tutoring to families and to school districts. And Katie's going to drop the link in the chat for our website. You can find more information on our website. We actually offer a free trial to anyone who's interested in our online dyslexia tutoring, and we offer that with no obligations. So please feel free to visit us at our website if you want to and sign up for a trial to try our tutoring out and see how it goes and see if it's something that would fit your needs. Thought we would go over the objectives for today and some additional info. So we're going to start by talking about general info about standardized testing. Then we're going to go on to challenges for a student with dyslexia, talk about helping a student with dyslexia prepare for standardized tests, what teachers can look for during testing, some things to do after testing, standardized testing accommodations, and then analyzing testing results. And we're planning on having a presentation for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then having a question and answer session for about 25 or 30 minutes after that. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Katie, Natalie, and Patrice today from the Dyslexia Connect administrative staff. Very glad to have them here. They are former teachers and also dyslexia tutors who have a wealth of information, experience and training working with students who have dyslexia, and they are going to be helping to answer your questions tonight. If you do have a question, we would like to ask that you submit that in the chat, and you can submit that at any point during the webinar, during my presentation, during the question and answer session, whenever you feel like asking that question. We're going to be trying to answer some of those questions as the webinar, as the presentation proceeds, and then we will also be taking some of those at the end during the Q&A to answer out loud in case we think other people might have the same question. And if you don't mind, we would like to ask that you click the Everyone tab in the chat box when you submit a question. That will ensure that the question is visible by everybody in the webinar. So I will be able to see it. Katie, Natalie, and Patrice will be able to see it, and also all the attendees will be able to see it. And that helps us keep track of the questions a little bit more easily, and also means that everybody can see the question, which is great because we've noticed that a lot of times when one of our attendees has a question, a lot of other attendees have the same question. And so it's helpful for them to be able to see the question and to see the response. If you don't mind, we'd also like to ask that you include your role when you submit a question. So for example, if you are a parent of a student with dyslexia, you can just mention that in your question. Or if you are a teacher who works with students who have dyslexia, you can mention that. Knowing your role will help us to tailor the answer that we give you as best as possible and hopefully provide the most relevant information to you. So if you remember to do that, that's something that's helpful for us. We are recording the webinar tonight, and there's going to be a recording available. We're going to be sending that out with a follow-up email that will go out on Monday, I believe. So you will get a link where you can watch the webinar and certain sections of it, or the whole thing if you want to, as much as you want. So everybody who registered for the webinar will be receiving that. One of the reasons why we like to use the everyone chat in the everyone tab in the chat box is that our attendees are also able to provide great info. One of the reasons why I like doing these webinars is that we get people together who have a great wealth of knowledge and experience about dyslexia, and other attendees are often able to provide information about things as well. So when you submit your question using the Everyone tab, then a lot of times other attendees will be able to give you information as well. We are offering a professional development certificate for teachers and paraprofessionals who would like one of those, who are attending the live webinar tonight. So it is available to anyone who attends the full live webinar. If you are interested in getting a certificate, please contact us from our website, which is dyslexiaconnect.com, and ask for a certificate. Once you get to our website, you can click on any of the buttons that say free trial, because all of those buttons bring up our contact forms on the site. And you can just send us a message there saying you're looking for a certificate, or you can also use our contact page and use the contact form on there. Unfortunately, we are not able to provide a certificate in response to requests in the chat during the webinar. So if you would like a certificate, please go to our website and submit a message, and then we'll be happy to communicate with you about that. We're also having another webinar coming up. We host quite a few webinars during the school year. It averages out to about one per month with some breaks for the holidays and things. But we're going to be having another webinar in June, on June 4th at 6 Central Time. And that webinar is going to be called Dyslexia and Avoiding the Summer Slump. And we're going to be able to provide some great information on how to help students with dyslexia avoid the summer slump, avoid that decline in reading and spelling that some students experience during the summer when they're not getting regular instruction during that summer break. And so this will be really helpful for teachers and for parents. So if you're interested, Katie is going to be putting the link for that in the chat, and we'd love to have you sign up if you're interested. So I thought we would go over some general info about standardized testing to begin with today. Standardized testing originates through the federal No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. Under this law, schools were required to create and give assessments to all students at certain grade levels in order to receive federal funding. The results that come from standardized testing are on a bell curve. And that means that students are compared with other students who did the same test and grouped into certain categories of low performers, average performers, and high performers based on that bell curve. Computer adaptive testing is sometimes used for standardized tests these days. And with a computer adaptive test, this means that as the test progresses, questions get easier or more difficult based on whether or not the student is choosing the correct answers. Scores from standardized testing are listed in percentile score and percentile rank. And this is something that can be a little bit confusing sometimes. I know I've occasionally looked at data and thought, wait a minute, is everybody else like above this or below this of a certain percentage? So I thought we would just go over what that means for a moment. So a score percentile represents the percentage of scores that are equal to or below a certain score within a given sample. So for example, the 75th percentile SAT score for incoming freshmen is 1400. That means that 75% of students scored 1400 or below, and then 25% of students scored above 1400. There are some challenges that students with dyslexia face when they are doing state standardized testing. So one of those is anxiety. A student with dyslexia may worry about failing a standardized test and disappointing parents or teachers, and that can cause a lot of stress. Also, the test is typically a change of routine. Many students with dyslexia enjoy routine and knowing what to expect during the day. And the change of routine that is involved with a testing day can be difficult for them because they like to have routines and schedules, and going to school and suddenly having something that's different from other days can be kind of tough for them. Also, the student may lack confidence in reading. We know that dyslexia causes difficulties, of course, with reading, reading comprehension, and spelling. And going into a standardized test, if a student is lacking confidence in reading, can be very, very stressful for them and anxiety provoking because they know they're going to be required to read a lot during that test. And so that can make standardized tests difficult for them. There are some things that you can do to help a student with dyslexia prepare for a standardized test to help improve the results. One thing is to keep the routine. Keep the routine at home and in the classroom as close to normal as possible during testing days. Of course, sometimes it's not possible to keep it completely the same, but the more that you are able to keep things similar, that will help students with dyslexia feel more comfortable. You can also do a trial run. In the classroom, you can do a trial run of what testing will look like. You can model how to log into the test if you're using computer adaptive testing, walking through expectations, problem solving, what the student needs to do if they need to go to the restroom or get a drink of water or take breaks, etc. And the more they know about the test environment ahead of time, the calmer they will be and the less stressed out they will be going into it. Practice tests. Many states offer practice tests that can be used to discuss test taking strategies and or calming strategies while taking the test. These are also very helpful to show students the possible format of questions before the test. So this is really great because, of course, you can get them used to the tests, used to the format, and that way they're going to know much more what to expect, and it won't feel like something that's completely out of left field for them. Another thing to do is to confirm testing accommodations. So you can confirm whether or not the student has testing accommodations from an IEP or 504 plan. If the student does have testing accommodations, make sure they know how and when to use them because, of course, accommodations don't do any good if they are just on paper. The student needs to know how to use them and when they can use them to make them beneficial. You can also talk to the student about the test. You can talk to them at home or in the school about what the test will be like and reassure the student that the progress they have made during the school year. And we're going to put an article actually in the chat that has some additional information about standardized testing and anxiety, and you might find that helpful. It's from an organization called Understood. So here's some things that teachers can look for during testing. First of all, classroom schedule changes and mood. You may notice that classroom schedule changes required by testing affect a student's mood. It's possible that a student will be stressed out and not really feel like they are themselves during testing day due to the change of schedule and the stress from the test. And you might notice mood differences in the students that you're working with. Also, as mentioned just a moment ago, check to see, first of all, which accommodations the student has available before the test. And then during the test, check to see which accommodations the student is actually using. This is really good to do because that will help you analyze accommodations and you can notice which accommodations were used, which ones were not used. And this will be beneficial when it comes time to have a review of the student's IEP or 504 meeting. You might notice that one type of accommodation was really helpful for them and they were very comfortable using it. And maybe there's some other ones that are like that, similar to it. And then you might notice that some accommodations weren't used, and maybe those can just be taken off the plan to simplify it. So, why don't some students use their accommodations? So, it happens sometimes that students have accommodations available, but they don't use them. And I thought we could talk about why that may be. First of all, sometimes students don't want to stand out or feel different, and they feel like using their accommodations might do that. It's also possible that they don't think the accommodation will help, or they don't really understand how it will help. And this is another reason why it's good to look at accommodations ahead of time and talk to the student about them so they have a really specific idea about why they will help and when they can use them. And we're going to put an article actually about accommodations for testing in the chat. Katie's going to put that in there in case you would like to read more about that. So here's some things to do after testing. First of all, we want to provide positive feedback to the student. We want to congratulate them for working hard and getting the test completed. And of course, we want them to not have negative associations with testing. We want them to feel good about working hard and doing the tests. So giving them positive feedback will really help. You can compliment them on how hard they worked, how hard they tried, and that will help them to be more confident when they have other standardized tests coming up. Here's some standardized testing accommodations that might be helpful on a test. And as mentioned, it's important, first of all, to confirm accommodations that might be available in an IEP or 504 plan. Accommodations should be routinely used. And the reason for this is that if they are not routinely used before standardized testing, the student might not be familiar with them or really know how to use them and probably won't get much benefit from it. So it's best to use accommodations that they've already been using and they're used to using on the standardized test because that's going to increase the chance that they will use those accommodations and feel good about using them. Also, some accommodations cannot be used. Some accommodations can only be used during instruction and not during testing. And so that's something to pay attention to. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, requires each state to provide a list of accommodations that can be used during standardized testing. So you can actually, if you're curious about this and want the list, you can contact the Department of Education in the state where you are and ask for that list or find it online. Or it's possible somebody in the school district will also have access to that list. And that will tell you which accommodations are allowed on standardized testing in that state. And it's helpful to look into it individually in each state since these do vary, which ones are allowed. As we mentioned, computer adaptive testing is used for a lot of standardized tests these days, and some of them actually come with accommodations built into the application. So this is a handy thing if accommodations are available for the student on the test and you're using a computer for the test, you might be able to get accommodations right from the application itself. They might be built in. Here's some other accommodations that are very, very helpful. If the student's doing the test on paper, a highlighter can be very helpful to them. They can highlight sections that they need to go back to. They can sort of mark what they've read so far and what they haven't read so far and mark up the test in different ways that will help them keep track of where they are and feel a little bit more organized. A read aloud tool or text to speech tool is also very helpful if that's being allowed as an accommodation. And of course, it's likely that if a computer adaptive test has accommodations built in, they might have speech to text already built into it. Also, if it's a paper test, there are other apps and different things that you can use to read text, and there might be something like that available. Another great accommodation is extended time. We know that dyslexia affects reading, spelling, and reading comprehension, and often students with dyslexia are going to read slower than their peers. So having extra time is beneficial on multiple levels. First of all, the student with dyslexia will be less stressed knowing that they have extra time to complete the test, and that will make them feel less like they have to rush. It's also much more likely that they will complete the entire test, and most likely the results that you get from that will be better and more accurate, and a more accurate picture of what they actually know if they don't feel like they need to rush. So extra time is always a great accommodation. A calculator is a great accommodation for any math problems. Another accommodation that can really help is small group or individual testing. Some students with dyslexia might feel overwhelmed if they have to take the standardized test in a big room with lots of other kids around. And they may feel more comfortable if they are able to do the test in a small group or in a place that they're used to, or individually with a teacher or paraprofessional. That may be a less stress situation for them and might help them on the test. Well, here's some things to consider when analyzing testing results. Results on standardized tests may vary a lot for a student with dyslexia, and those results may not be an accurate representation of their performance or growth for a student with dyslexia. And of course, there's a question, why is this the case? Well, there are reasons why students with dyslexia struggle with tests in general. And sometimes testing results for a student with dyslexia may show more about the fact that they struggle with tests than actual info about what their knowledge is and what they've learned so far. Students with dyslexia tend to have a difficult time with high pressure exams, and standardized testing often feels very high pressure to them. Also, as we mentioned before, normal accommodations that a student with dyslexia has on tests or exams or regular instruction may not be available or allowed to be used on standardized tests. So they may have accommodations that they normally use that work very well for them that are not permitted on a standardized test. And this is going to show in the results. Also, reading comprehension skills. ELA or reading portion of the test will assess reading comprehension skills. If a student struggles with fluency or decoding, as many students with dyslexia do, they might have trouble decoding the text and reading those words, which is going to lead to them guessing about comprehension questions, and that'll probably lower their comprehension accuracy when they're answering those questions. Well, how do we accurately test reading for students with dyslexia? We can accurately assess reading progress for students with dyslexia by using specific tests that are benchmarked. And what that means is that they would start out having their reading assessed with the benchmark test at a certain point, and progress would be traced off of that initial benchmark test. So we could see like, well, the student was having trouble with these sounds when we did this benchmark test. 3 months later, they've improved. They know this short vowel sound, they know this vowel combination sound, and that gives us a much more accurate idea of the progress that the student is making and real improvement that they're making. If you have a student with a low score on a standardized test, here are some areas to examine. So you'll want to look at each area of reading, and instructional support should be based on areas of need. So first of all, phonemic awareness, and that refers to the letters, letter combinations, and the sounds that those things make in the language. And that's the first area to look at if they're having trouble with their scores. Also, you'll want to look at decoding skills, the ability to sound words out and to read words. You can also look at encoding, which is another term that we use for spelling, being able to put phonic sounds together to make words and syllables. You can check their fluency, the amount of words that they can accurately read per minute and the accuracy with which they read at. Their reading comprehension, how well they are comprehending what they read versus maybe some difficulties they're having with answering comprehension questions. And also, you can look at their vocabulary. You might notice that some students with dyslexia lag behind in vocabulary and knowledge of vocabulary because reading has been difficult for them. And as a result, they haven't built up that same store of words that their peers without dyslexia have. And so that's an important thing to look at as well. It's also important to keep in mind that testing, standardized testing is really a snapshot of a student's skills on a given day. And it's not necessarily an overall picture of everything that's been going on for the past year. And that's important to keep in mind. Looking at the bigger picture to assess a student's progress will give you a much more accurate picture of how they are doing and progress they're making. You can look at assignments they have, different tests and exams throughout the year, benchmark tests, um, just in general, how the student is feeling, how confident they are feeling about their progress, and different things like that. That will give you a much more holistic view of how that student is doing than just the standardized test result. Well, I wanted to mention Dyslexia Connect has a YouTube channel with all kinds of different information about dyslexia on it. And we have info about how to test for dyslexia, symptoms of dyslexia, what dyslexia is. And a lot of people find the videos really helpful. So I wanted to mention that. Katie is going to put the link for that in the chat. And I put the address up here as well, youtube.com/@dyslexiaconnect. And feel free to check that out if you're interested in some of those videos. We also wanted to give you some more general information about dyslexia if you would like to learn more about it. So, first of all, I would recommend visiting our website, dyslexiaconnect.com. We have all kinds of information about dyslexia on there. We have a dyslexia blog, a page about what dyslexia is, and you probably find that helpful. Understood.org is also a great website, and that site has topics related to dyslexia, dyscalculia, language disorders, and ADHD. And then also the International Dyslexia Association is a good resource. They have a lot of info about dyslexia for parents and teachers. And they also have some fact sheets about dyslexia that they provide that are free to download. And finally, if you would like some additional information about dyslexia and standardized testing, I would recommend going to this blog post that we have on our website. It's titled Help My Child Did Poorly on State Testing. And this is a great post in video for teachers or parents talking about different reasons why a student with dyslexia might have struggled on a standardized test and the different perspective to have on that when you're looking at those results. Well, thank you again for attending. We're going to get to our question and answer session in just a moment, but I wanted to mention again, if you're interested in our online dyslexia tutoring, you can find us at dyslexiaconnect.com, and we offer that free trial I mentioned with no obligation if you'd like to try our tutoring out. We'd also love to have you follow us on social media. We are very active on Instagram and Facebook, and we post lots of different graphics with information about dyslexia. And we have a parent support group as well, if you're interested in that. We usually post information about upcoming webinars on those social media channels. And so that's a good way to be notified if we have another webinar coming up, because we do them pretty consistently during the year. Also, as I mentioned, our YouTube channel is a great resource, and that has lots of videos about dyslexia. All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and get to some questions. Do we have any questions that popped up that we want to answer out loud? I'm going to take a look at the chat here. Okay. All right. So maybe we can talk about some general questions that people sometimes have about about dyslexia. Oh, Grace, did you have a question? Just saw that you had your hand raised. Yeah. Patrice, would you be able to maybe share some questions, common questions that we get during webinars, and we can talk about those for a moment?
Sure. The question, I know we've talked about this a little bit, that if the student is able to be successful in the classroom, but then struggles with standardized testing. So what could be the possible explanations for that? And I think we have touched on that
Yeah,
throughout
that's
the webinar.
a great question. Yep. So if a student does seem to be doing pretty well in the classroom, but is struggling with standardized testing, you probably want to look at some of those areas that were mentioned. The student might be feeling really stressed out by the idea of testing. They may be a little bit thrown when they have to change their routine for the day. There are also things like accommodations they might be using while they're in the classroom that are not available on the test. And I wanted to mention that it's very common actually that parents of students with dyslexia feel pretty good about progress a student's making, and then standardized testing results come out and they suddenly feel like, what is going on? I thought my child was making progress. I was feeling positive about it. They were feeling positive about it. And that's why it's very important to just sort of look at that standardized test as one snapshot and look much more at the overall picture because overall, standardized tests are not typically a good way to gauge progress that a student is making, a student who has dyslexia is making in reading or spelling and other areas as well. So, yeah, so I would say keep that in perspective, and that will help you to feel better about results that might come in from standardized testing that may vary a bit.
In fact, Peter, related to that, uh, member just commented that even if a student does do well on standardized testing, it doesn't mean that they're no longer struggling.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that comment, Anna. Yeah, that's a great point. If a student has good results on a standardized test, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need further instruction in reading and spelling. So that's very important too, because you don't want to interrupt the instruction that a student's getting that they're making progress with just because of maybe one positive test score. So that's a that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. Would you have anything to add about that, Katie? About, as far as um, performance on standardized tests varying from classroom performance and what to think about that?
It's tricky because you've got to look at all of the pieces that a student is required to do in order to perform well on a test. They've got to be a strong test taker. They
Yeah.
have to be analyzing each of those questions. And then they also have to be relying on their fluency and comprehension skills. And we know both of those things require a whole list of skills behind it. So if there's a few missing pieces, it really makes the whole experience challenging. So you've got to keep trucking away and working on the skills that you know they need instruction in order to fill those holes so that they can succeed on those standardized tests.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Well, looks like Ingrid had a question. Any suggestions or advice to help them relax before the test? That's a great question. So I think one of them that we brought up during the presentation was keeping the routine similar if possible. It's not always possible to keep it completely the same, of course, but at home, if you can try to have the same basic routine that you have on a normal school day, that should help things. It's possible that their teacher can try to have a same general routine with testing. Those are things. I think also just having a really good conversation with the student before the test can also be really helpful because often students with dyslexia get really nervous about things or situations they don't understand. That can cause them to have a lot of anxiety. For example, we noticed that once a student discovers that they have dyslexia and they realize that that's the reason for their difficulties, it's a huge relief to them. They feel like, oh, that's the reason I'm having these troubles. Okay. It's much worse when they don't understand what's going on, don't understand why they're struggling. So I would say with standardized testing and having a good conversation with them and saying like, you're going to take this test, you're doing great this year, no matter how you do on the test, that's not going to change the fact that you're doing great this year. And just remind them of that and help them to keep that in perspective. Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that, Patrice?
I was just going to
Mm.
say, and you mentioned this earlier, if practice tests are allowed for any of those standardized tests,
Yeah.
that's such an excellent way to lower their anxiety. If they're familiar with the format of the test, how the test will proceed, what the expectations are for the test. And in fact, I had a situation one time where in a practice standardized test, we realized even though students were allowed extra time or alternate setting, the test was set so that each test question was timing them out after like 3 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So it was it was it's like, oh, this is not working. So anyway, we were able to get it straightened out through administration, but it's really helpful if they can practice the test as much as possible, talk through it. What are these questions like? How do you approach
Yeah.
those questions?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so beneficial. I remember when I took the ACT when I was finishing up high school actually, and I found sample tests to be so helpful because I felt like I knew exactly what I was going to be looking at when I sat down to do it, and it was really great for sure. So, yeah, thanks, Patrice. Would you have any tips, Natalie, about ways to help students relax before standardized tests?
Yeah, I was going to say practice tests, but maybe also like a visual countdown to the test,
Oh
some things that
yeah.
so they know what to expect. The predictability could help, relieve their anxiety and maybe have a teacher like write them a short letter that, a short note that's encouraging, tells you kind of a pep talk letter.
Yeah.
Um, I think a reminder that someone believes in them that's not their mom or dad or
Sure.
caregiver might be encouraging.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Katie, do you have any suggestions?
My all of those suggestions are great. My only other one would maybe be put it back on the teacher that this test is telling us how we can change our teaching to better help the student
Oh
instead
yeah.
of this is a test you need to do well on. This
Mm-hmm.
is a test for me to learn more about you as a learner. And so it takes the pressure off of them and puts it on you as the teacher or the adult that you can use the information to change your instruction and to tweak things as you need to make it
Yeah.
a better fit for them.
That is a really good point because that would take a lot of pressure off of them. They feel like they have to perform, for example. So, yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, thank you. Let's see. Any other questions we have or Patrice, would you like to share maybe one of the other common questions that we sometimes get during webinars?
There was a question, what accommodations would be suggested for middle school or high school students? Is there anything different than what you would suggest for elementary school students?
Yeah, I think some of those that we mentioned during the presentation would be really helpful. Extra time on tests, that's a really great accommodation for students with dyslexia during any quizzes, tests, or exams because it really helps to take the pressure off for them so that they feel like they have time to actually focus. So that one is good at any age. Would you have some, Patrice, that you like in particular?
I would
Accommodation
agree.
recommendations?
I think regardless of the age, I think all those accommodations are would be appropriate. The alternate setting, the extra time, and any other accommodation that they use during the school year, if they're allowed, would
Yeah.
definitely help.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Things are very beneficial. Katie, did you have any favorite accommodations that you'd like to suggest for
Um,
students?
they're not anything outside of what you already listed. For sixth graders, they were still considered part of our elementary school. We would work on a lot of strategies to like problem solving in the middle of a test. Look for keywords, words like your sequencing words within a text if you're looking back for
Yeah.
answers. So teaching them those kind of strategies and using those without throughout the year to make them comfortable with it so they can use it by the time they get to the test.
Yeah.
Those would be my only additional pieces for that.
That's a great idea. Do you have any additional ones you wanted to add, Natalie? Beyond the ones we already mentioned, or?
No, I think
Yeah.
you covered it in the webinar, and Katie and Patrice gave some great ideas as well.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds good. Um, let's see. So Grace was asking about accommodations that are not allowed when taking a standardized test. That can vary a lot between states. So if you're interested in seeing which ones are allowed to be used on standardized tests, I would contact your State Department of Education, and they should be able to provide you with that list. It's a little bit confusing since there isn't really a standardized list of what can be used and what can't be throughout the country. It depends on the state about what they will be allowing students to use on standardized tests. Yeah. Yeah. Any additional questions at all? Let's see. Do we have any other questions, Patrice, on our list there of common questions?
Uh, Another common question is if the student does score low in the standardized testing, what would the next steps be to support that student?
Yeah, that's a great question. So going back to the presentation, what we were mentioning about things to look at, different areas of reading to look at and spelling, that's a very good place to start. You can start by looking at their phonemic awareness, their knowledge of the sounds that letters and letter combinations make, syllable rules, also looking at decoding their ability to decode words and to sound them out, and also to encode, to spell words and use those phonetic sounds to be able to build syllables and words. You can look at their reading fluency as well to see what their reading accuracy is like. Um, something that we notice a lot of when we start working with students actually is that often the students' reading accuracy is very low. So even if the student is able to read a decent amount of words per minute on a fluency test, it might be that they're reading with a 70% accuracy rate, 80% accuracy rate at grade level. And when students struggle with reading accuracy, often they end up developing a lot of coping mechanisms. And one of those is to guess at words. And you can imagine if a student starts doing that and gets in the habit of guessing at more and more words when they don't recognize them, don't recognize the shape of them, if they aren't comfortable sounding them out, uh, that can cause more and more issues with reading comprehension as the reading comprehension level goes up. So that is definitely something to look at as well, because if the student can't accurately read the text, they are not going to be able to accurately answer questions from the text on a consistent basis. Yeah. Let's see. Would you have any recommendations, Katie, with if a student has scored poorly, like what the recommended next steps would be besides those we mentioned?
I would probably do some type of reading fluency assessment to see what
Hmm.
kinds of words they're missing on grade level, and then maybe some type of word reading to figure out is it the entire sentence, like they need word sentence fluency, or they
Yeah.
actually need support in decoding individual words, and then
Yep.
instruction follows, which one kind of pinpoints the issue.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not sure I would have any, it would really depend on the student and how low the score was.
Yeah.
And the student, if they're old enough, may be able to tell you what it was. They may be able to tell you what
Right.
kinds of questions they missed or the parts that they found challenging. Or maybe the texts were just too hard and they just stopped halfway through and they didn't even
Yep.
read the whole thing. Could be also
Right.
very likely.
Yeah. Yeah. Felt frustrated and overwhelmed and just
Yeah.
stopped
Mhm.
trying to do it after that point. Yeah, that's a really good point because sometimes these tests are long and students get really overwhelmed and they can just feel like they don't want to keep pushing forward harder and harder and harder if it's just really confusing and difficult for them. Would you have any recommendations, Patrice? What you
I,
would
I
do
was
as a
just
next
gonna,
step?
I was just gonna say that in particular, that might also be a red flag for the student to be referred for further evaluation. If the student has been struggling and then the standardized testing scores are low and providing a little more information about those areas in which the student is really having difficulty, that might be worth, sending talking to parents and discussing the possibility of intervention measures or
Yeah.
referrals to special ed for evaluation. So
Yeah,
that
absolutely. That's a great recommendation. Yep. Yep. Let's see, do we have any other questions at all? Doesn't look like it. So, yeah, well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up our webinar for tonight. So I just wanted to thank everybody for attending tonight. It was just so great to have you here today, and thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to attend here. And looks like we might take one more question actually. It looks like Yolanda just asked us a question. She says, my district uses DIBELS to test K through 2, and when they are well below, a letter is sent out to parents stating they are showing signs of dyslexia. Is it possible to diagnose a K through 2 second grade student with dyslexia, or are they still in the developing their skills phase? What age is it appropriate to discuss an evaluation? That is a great question. Katie, do you have an opinion on this?
Yes, as I was reading that question, I thought this is a really challenging question.
Yeah. Yep.
So a previous special education teacher, and in our district, we really did not qualify a lot of students for special education until third grade, because we, as a district, they would recommend a certain deviation from the norm on the scores. And what happens is that the student gets so far behind by the time they get to third grade, they have a very hard time catching up.
Yeah.
So it's not that it's not possible to diagnose a student with dyslexia in kindergarten to second grade. It may just be uncommon, but that doesn't mean that that's the wrong thing to do.
Yep.
Orton Gillingham instruction and the science of reading instruction is going to benefit any child in that K to 2 range, whether they have dyslexia or not. They will benefit from that instruction.
Yeah.
So I would say if you're unsure, it'd be better to get them that specialized instruction, and make sure those gaps are filled before that gap gets too big.
That's a really, really great point. We say this pretty frequently that a diagnosis of dyslexia is not needed for a student to get the type of instruction they need and start making progress. So even if you're working with a student, you think, wow, they're struggling a little bit more, they're taking some more time to be able to learn these things, you can get them the right type of instruction right then and start working at addressing that deficit even without a diagnosis of dyslexia, because the diagnosis is not necessary for students to get exactly what they need and help them make progress. And like Katie was saying, one of the great things about the Orton Gillingham method and the methods in the Orton Gillingham family is the fact that these methods are great for any students learning to read or spell. So you're not going to make a misstep by using these methods with any students, whether they have dyslexia or don't have dyslexia. They're going to benefit from it no matter what level they're at and what they're struggling with. So that's a great point. Yeah. Would you have anything to add to that, Patrice, about testing for dyslexia and specifically those ages, K through second grade?
No, I had the same experience as Katie was just saying that, the old adage that up until third grade, you're learning to read, and then after third grade, you're reading to learn. So that seemed to
Yeah.
be sort of the cutoff point, that second, third grade year. And students can benefit too. I mean, there are now a number of districts have those approaches using foundations, K through 3 foundations programs, which are Wilson based for the whole class, and that also helps to give students more of that phonics instruction from a very early age, and then see who is struggling. Perhaps they can be referred, if your district has an intervention program,
Yeah.
first to see if they can make progress in the intervention program before being referred for any further services. But
Yeah,
that
and
does seem to be the age, as Katie was saying, that before students are really tested.
yeah, definitely. And it's so great when a student can get the right type of instruction early, because sometimes that means that they never sort of hit that point where they're struggling, drastically struggling with their reading. They start getting the instruction they need, start making progress, so they never reach that point where they feel like they're failing in reading, which is really beneficial. So they don't have that drop in confidence that comes with that, and they're able to just start making progress and continue on from there. And I'd also mention that many of the students in our tutoring program do not have a diagnosis of dyslexia. It's just a matter of their parents notice what was going on and notice symptoms of dyslexia that seem to line up with how their child is struggling, or they simply notice that they are struggling with reading and spelling and decide to seek out help for that reason. So it's never too early to get the right type of instruction for a student. Yeah. Great. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you again for everybody for attending tonight. Thank you so much to Katie, Patrice, and Natalie for helping with questions tonight. I really appreciate it. And as we mentioned, the recording of this will be going out later, so you'll be receiving that. And we hope that you are able to attend our next webinar. So I hope that everybody has a great night. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.